Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
Did Ryan realize what he wanted, or did he not? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! He made one more stop and then headed back to Bob and Sarah's house. He noticed Jorge's car in the driveway and wondered what was going on. Putting the small box he had just taken into his pocket, he walked inside, where he was met by Jorge, Bob, and Sarah. "Have you heard the news?" asked Sarah. "No, what news?" Ryan asked. "They just announced that Jake Knight died of a heart attack," Bob said. "Heart attack?" Ryan asked. "When did this happen?" "According to the news, right after the hearing this morning," Bob said. "Well, guess what?" Ryan said. "Are you not involved in this?" asked Jorge. Ryan shook his head. "I didn't touch it," Ryan said. Jorge looked at him suspiciously. "I'm serious," Ryan said. "I never touched it." "Never." "So, what have you been doing?" asked Sarah. Ryan pulled out a box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a very expensive wedding and engagement ring. "I bought this for Beverly and stopped by Lisa's," Ryan said, deliberately not mentioning his visit to the courtroom. "It's beautiful," Sarah said. "I hope she likes it," Ryan said. "Trust me, she'll love it, Dad," Sarah said. "So, you stopped by Lisa's?" "Yes," Ryan said. "I gave her the DVD that Elmer gave me and accused her of all the lies, cheating, and betrayal. I also told her what was going on with Knight and told her about Beverly. I think she didn't take it well." "It's just too sad," Sarah said sarcastically. Ryan smiled and nodded his head. "I don't argue, Princess," he said. Later, Sarah set dinner on the table, and everyone sat down to eat. They invited Jorge to stay, and he joined them. After a pleasant dinner, they all gathered in the living room. "There's a Jake special tonight," Bob said. "I think it will be interesting to see how they portray his life and career." "Why not?" said Ryan. Sarah brought several glasses of sweet tea, and they began to watch the program that had just started. "This is one of my favorite shows," Bob said. "I like his way of looking at business." Ryan chuckled and nodded his head. How anyone could like something like that was beyond him, but, as he decided, to each his own. They turned their attention to the program. "Good evening and welcome to a special episode of the program," said a relatively young man with dark curly hair. "Tonight, we look at the life of Jacob Knight, the disgraced former CEO of Knight Petroleum, who was accused of plotting to murder his estranged wife and her ex-husband. As you may know, Mr. Knight passed away this afternoon from a heart attack. Our guest today is author and investigative journalist Trevor Whitaker, who is about to release a book about Knight called From Riches to Rags, The Rise and Fall of Jacob Knight. Welcome to the program, Mr. Whitaker." "Thank you for inviting me, Neil," said an older, well-dressed man in a gray suit. "I'm not one to speak ill of the dead, so I want to start by expressing my condolences to the family and friends of Jacob Knight. Our thoughts and prayers are with you." "Tell us, Trevor, what do you think about all this?" Neil asked. "Like you, Neil, I don't want to speak ill of the dead," Trevor said, "but honestly, in this case, I'm not sure you'd find anyone who would mind if you did." "That doesn't sound very nice," Neil said. "Why do you say that?" "Well, to be honest, Mr. Knight was not a person to inspire kind thoughts," Trevor replied. "Surely someone loved him, didn't they?" Neil asked. "On the contrary, Neil. In fact, according to my research over the past few years, no one liked him. Nobody. In fact, he was universally despised and hated, even by members of his own family," Trevor said. "One source even told me, and I'm quoting from my book, look up the definition of villain in the dictionary, and there will be a picture of Jacob Knight. This came from someone who worked with Knight for many years." "Wow," Neil said. "So why did your source stay with him for so long?" "Simply put, Knight paid him well," Trevor said. "And this man was honestly afraid of what Knight would do if he ever left. You see, Knight believed that you were either with him or against him. It was not considered a wise career move to give it up." "I see," Neil said. "Now on to the case. Knight was accused of, among other things, plotting to murder the ex-husband of his now estranged wife. From what we learned, the divorce between her and her first husband took place over 12 years ago, and it seemed to be as amicable as it could be. There was no claim for child support, even though she had a teenage daughter, and no claim for spousal support. She essentially left them all of the joint assets. So why did Knight suddenly want to kill this man? It doesn't make sense. He had the man's wife and daughter, why pay to kill him 9 years later? To answer this question, you need to understand the man himself, Trevor said. A few years ago, I was sitting in Knight's office, interviewing him for a big story about the company's rapid expansion and growth. There was a sign on his desk that said, *, kill them all, God will sort it out. *, that pretty much describes Jacob Knight. This is how he conducted his business, and this is how he conducted his personal life. If he saw something he wanted, he would do anything to get it. This applied to business, property, even women. Women? Neil asked. Yes, said Trevor. In this respect, Jacob Knight made a certain former president look like a Boy Scout. If he saw a woman he wanted, he would do anything to get her. I've spoken to many men whose lives and marriages he's said to have destroyed. It was like big game hunting for him. I see, said Neil. So, explain why he was pursuing this man. Well, Neil, it turns out that the ex-husband was working as a private security guard for a foreign oil company that Knight wanted to acquire, Trevor said. You have to understand that Knight's idea of business negotiation was, it's a nice business you have here. It's going to hurt if something happens to it. He often took a carrot-and-stick approach, offering what seemed like a bargain price while at the same time demonstrating his power to intimidate the target. About 4 years ago, Knight began targeting this foreign competitor. He then learned that the ex-husband, whose name was never publicly mentioned, thanks to a restraining order, worked for the company, Trevor continued. Knight apparently decided he could literally kill 2 birds with 1 stone and went after the man with a team of hired killers, according to court documents we've seen. Keep in mind, all this information came from the person Knight originally targeted. So that explains the judge's order, Neil said. I found it interesting that the original divorce papers were sealed by order of this judge, and the summary we received as a result of the FOIA request had all the parties' names and addresses blacked out. It's a little weird, isn't it? The federal prosecutor said he acted out of concern for the man's safety, Trevor said. The defense went for it. They want the man's identity to be made public and for him to testify in open court. Given recent events, it's good that the judge stands firm. So Knight was going after him just because he could? Neil asked. Basically, yes, Trevor said. Knight didn't really need a reason to do anything. All that mattered was what he wanted, that's all. What do you think will happen next? Neil asked. The fact that the principals, including Knight, are now dead does not necessarily mean the case is closed, even though the charges against those individuals have become null and void, Trevor said. The man who allegedly shot Lisa Knight testified to the state in exchange for a reduced sentence, but that doesn't mean he won't spend some time in prison. In addition, the feds continue to investigate Knight's internal operations, and it is possible that Mrs. Knight could be charged as an accomplice. So this may drag on for a while. What about the company itself? Neil asked. As you know, Neil, the company's stock has taken a hit, Trevor said. Shareholders are dumping their shares as quickly as they can to minimize their losses. If something isn't done soon, the company will probably go out of business. I heard a rumor that something is being prepared, but it hasn't been confirmed to me yet. I see, Neil said. Very interesting. Thanks for coming, Trevor. You've given us all a fresh perspective on the situation. Thanks, Neil, Trevor said. Next, we will discuss whether the Knight Petroleum situation will affect your retirement accounts, and if so, how. We'll speak to a renowned financial advisor in a few minutes. Stay tuned, Neil said before the commercial began. Damn it, Bob said. I had no idea it was that bad. It was, Ryan said. Well, guys, it was fun, but I need to call home and go to bed. Do you still want me to keep an eye on things here? Asked Jorge. If you can, please, Ryan said. I think the main danger has passed, but who knows? I agree, Jorge said. Okay, thanks for dinner, guys, but I have to go. See you later, they said. They said their goodbyes, and Ryan went upstairs, where he called Beverly and went to bed. The next morning, he got up early, and after breakfast, said a warm goodbye to Bob, Sarah, and little Ryan. After promising to keep them updated on his wedding plans, Ryan headed to the airport. On the way, he noticed a large church, and something told him he needed to stop. He hadn't been to church since Sarah's baptism, but something drew him to this place. He parked and went inside, lit a candle for his fallen comrades, and sat down on a bench in the back row. He noticed he was the only one in the large temple, with the exception of the priest at the altar. He felt he should kneel down, and when he did, he thought about Dawson and all the others who never came back. As he knelt, his head resting on his hands clasped in prayer, he mentally confessed everything he had done since the day Lisa and Sarah left. All his hatred, anger, and disappointment poured out of his heart. He cried over his losses and was grateful for what he now had. When he finished, he looked up at the large crucifix above the altar and wondered about its meaning. As he sat back down on the pew, a young Hispanic man in priestly robes sat next to him. "Is everything all right, my son?" he asked softly. Ryan smiled to himself. He was old enough to be the man's father. He held his tongue, something unusual for him, and looked at the young priest. He smiled, nodding his head. "Yes, now, Padre. Thank you. Then may the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, be with you, my son," said the priest, crossing himself. "Thanks again," Ryan said. The priest stood up, and Ryan joined him. "If you need anything, prayer, confession, consultation, do not hesitate to contact me," the priest said. "I think I'm okay now, Padre," Ryan replied. "Thanks anyway." "I will still pray for you, my son," said the priest, nodding his head. "I feel like you're starting a new chapter in your life, and you're going to need all the help you can get." "Do you need to know my name?" Ryan asked. The priest smiled, shaking his head. "God already knows, my son," he said. Ryan nodded. "That's right," he said. "Thank you." The priest smiled, nodded again, and walked toward the large altar in front. Ryan took his hat and left the building. As he stepped out into the bright sunlight, he took a deep breath. He felt like a new man. He laughed to himself, got into the car, and went to the airport. He called Beverly when his plane landed, threw his bag in the truck, and headed home. As he drove, he felt better than he had in a long time. Everything seemed fresh, new, almost as if he had never looked at it before. He finally got home and found Beverly waiting for him on the porch. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets when he saw her. She had always been beautiful, he thought, but the shorts she was wearing were the shortest he had ever seen on a woman. They were even shorter than the ones she had before. She was also wearing a cropped t-shirt that barely covered the bottom of her breasts. "You look like you haven't seen me in forever," she said, hugging him. They kissed for a long time. "Lunch is served by the pool if you're hungry," she said with a mischievous smile. "Lead," he replied. As she walked ahead, he noticed that the shorts didn't leave much to the imagination. When they reached the backyard, he looked around the pool, expecting to see a picnic basket or something similar. He walked around but still saw no sign of lunch. "Where's lunch?" he asked. "Right here," she said behind him. He turned around and saw her standing on the terrace, completely without anything. "That is, if you want me," she added. "Yes," he said, hugging her. They made love on the terrace and the bright sun at the same time. When they finished, he stood up and picked up his pants. "I almost forgot," he said. "I bought something for you." He took a box out of his pocket and opened it. Her eyes opened wide when she saw the set of rings. "They are beautiful," she said. He took out the wedding ring and carefully placed it on her finger. She smiled, and tears came to her eyes. "I love him," she said, "and I love you." "I love you too," he replied. She looked at his face carefully before speaking again. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You seem—" "I don't know, a little different." "Actually, yes," he replied. "I feel like a new person, starting a new life." She smiled and kissed him again. "I'm so glad," she said. I think we've both had enough sadness to last a lifetime. What do you think? Yes, he said. I completely agree. Oh, one more thing. What? She asked. He went inside and took a box from his bag. He handed it to Beverly and watched as she opened it. She took out a forged iron rooster, intended to decorate the wall. I like it, she said. What made you buy this? I don't know, he replied. I saw this and thought about you. I decided it was time to start hanging things on the walls, to make the house feel like a home again. I think it's a good idea, she said, and I know exactly where to hang it. He smiled upon hearing her words. Yes, he thought, home sweet home, this time for real. They got dressed and hung the rooster on the kitchen wall. Then Ryan called Russell. Hey, Ryan, Russell said. Did you get everything settled? Yes, I did, and I want to talk to you about the job offer, Ryan replied. Great, Russell said. Come on over, let's talk. I'll be right there, Ryan said. After telling Beverly, he cleaned up and drove into town, parking in front of the sheriff's office. He walked inside and noticed the deputies looking at him appraisingly. Sheriff Coltrane is waiting for you, Mr. Caldwell, the uniformed officer said, leading the way. She took him to Russell's office, opened the door, and let him in, then closed it behind her. Russell stood up and shook his hand. Sit down, he said. Ryan sat down and met Russell's gaze. Any questions? Yes, Ryan replied. There's one. What about my past? You already seem to know what I've been doing for the past 9 years. Russell smiled. You mean working as a private security guard and all that, Russell said, making air quotes. Yes, exactly that, Ryan replied. Well, 9 years of training security guards to work in dangerous situations is a lot of experience, if you ask me, Russell said. Plus, your service in the Army was quite outstanding. The county board agrees. What? Ryan asked. Yes, Russell said. They think you can teach our deputies a thing or two. I didn't even think about that, Ryan said. Don't worry, son, Russell said. I've already done a background check on you. This is standard procedure. They just want to make sure you're not a fugitive. You've never been behind bars, and everything's been cleared. Damn, you're cleaner on paper than some of my deputies. So, if you agree, you'll need to go through an interview with the county board. It's more of a formality. I'd advise you to buy some nicer clothes and a new hat. What about a beard? Ryan asked. Believe me, it hides a lot of sins, Russell smiled. As long as you keep it neat and trimmed, it's not a problem. Plus, it adds character. Ryan smiled. You've already thought about everything, haven't you? It's part of my job, son, Russell replied. As soon as they give the go-ahead, we'll select a uniform for you, and you'll follow me for a while. Well, what do you say? Okay, Ryan said. The worst thing they can do is say no. Let's make the appointment. Well done, Russell said. How about tomorrow morning at 8:30? Yeah, sounds good, Ryan replied. I'll go now and buy some new clothes. That's great, Russell said. See you then. After that, Ryan spent most of the day buying new clothes, boots, and a new hat. Beverly was surprised when he came in, loaded with new things. Don't ever complain about me buying new clothes again, she joked. So, where are you going before the county council? She asked. Tomorrow morning, he replied. I'm glad you're taking this on, she said. It'll do you good to integrate better into the community. I'm so proud of you. He smiled and kissed her. That evening, they watched the news and learned that the federal case against Knight Petroleum had expanded to include a number of middle managers. It seemed more people were involved than originally thought, but none of them appeared to know the full picture. The investigation into Jay also caused the company's stock price to fall further as confidence in the company plummeted. The next day, Ryan appeared before the county council with Russell. As Russell had said, the meeting was friendly and mostly informal. There were only a few questions that Ryan had to carefully consider before answering. Is this eye patch giving you problems with depth perception? One of the council members asked. It did at first, Ryan replied, but I've learned to deal with it. So, you can drive a car and shoot a gun without any problems? There haven't been any problems so far, Ryan said. Personally, I would prefer to see someone with direct law enforcement experience, another council member said. You don't even have a law degree. If we hire you, would you be willing to enroll in an online course and earn a 2-year degree? Absolutely, Ryan replied. How much do you expect to earn? Asked one of the women on the council. I haven't thought about it, ma'am, Ryan replied. To be honest, I don't need the money. Yes, we checked your financial affairs at the bank, she said. By the way, what you did for Ms. Simons was amazing. Thank you, he said. She needed help, so I decided to lend a hand. So, what about compensation? How much would you like to receive? She asked again. To be honest, I haven't thought about it, he replied. Whatever you pay Sheriff Coltrane. I think maybe you could donate it to a homeless shelter downtown or a women's and children's center. She smiled and nodded. I think we can arrange that, she said. What do you think? She added, turning to the other council members. They looked at each other and nodded in agreement. Yes, we can do that, one of them said. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have found our candidate. What do you think? Said a female council member. They discussed briefly among themselves before answering. I agree, one council member said. I suggest we vote. I support it, another council member added. Well, let's vote, said the female council member. Whoever is in favor of appointing Mr. Ryan Caldwell as sheriff, raise your hands. Everyone raised their hands. Who's against it? No hands went up. Very good, she said. Mr. Caldwell, congratulations and welcome aboard. Thank you, Ryan said, shaking her hand. Sheriff, why don't you escort Mr. Caldwell out and help him pick out his uniform? She asked. The oath-taking ceremony will be today at 1 p.m. Let's do that, Russell said, standing up. They returned to the sheriff's office, and Russell led Ryan to the back of the building, where they found several shirts and pants that looked like they would fit him. Ryan was relieved to see that they were all clean, ironed, and still in their protective plastic covers. He tried them on and found they fit perfectly. Russell also pulled out a new gray Stetson hat and handed it to Ryan. It looks like it suits you well, Russell said. Ryan tried it on and was surprised to find it fit better than his old, beat-up hat. Russell looked him over, nodding approvingly. You look good, son, he said. He then pulled out a black name tag from his desk drawer and pinned it to Ryan's shirt. Apparently, Russell had prepared a badge in advance, especially for this occasion. After pinning the badge on, Russell glanced at his watch. It's time for your oath, he said. Let me make a quick call. Ryan watched as Russell pulled out his phone and dialed a number. To Ryan's surprise, Beverly's voice came from the other end of the line. Russell winked at Ryan and put the call on speaker. Beverly, I really need you to come to my office right away, Russell said, sounding serious. Is everything okay? She asked, a hint of concern in her voice. I don't know, he replied, but this is serious, and I need you to come as soon as possible. Okay, Sheriff, she said, now sounding a bit worried. I'll be there in a few minutes. Russell ended the call and smiled at Ryan. That was brutal, Ryan said. Yes, it was, Russell agreed, but I had to make sure she came. It wouldn't be right for you to take the oath without her by your side, don't you think? A few minutes later, Beverly walked through the door and was ushered into Russell's office. Is everything okay? What's going on? She asked, slightly out of breath. Russell smiled and sat her down. It's all fine, honey, he said. I just thought you'd want to be here when your man is sworn in. He called out to Ryan, who walked into the office in his new uniform. Beverly gasped when she saw him. Wow, she said, smiling. I've always loved a man in uniform. So, when will the oath be taken? She asked Russell. Right now, he replied. A few moments later, the front door opened, and a group of well-dressed people entered the station. The desk sergeant came into Russell's office to inform him. Thank you, Russell said. Have everyone gather in the main conference room, if possible." "We'll do that, Sheriff," she replied, leaving the office. Russell looked at Ryan and Beverly. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I can be," Ryan replied, looking a bit nervous. They walked down the hallway and entered a large room filled with people, including several uniformed deputies. Ryan noticed a cooler filled with ice and a store-bought cake on a table, decorated for the ceremony. The deputies studied Ryan as he entered, and they seemed to approve of Russell's choice. There was no hostility or jealousy, which was a good sign. The ceremony itself was short and sweet. The chief county commissioner administered the oath of office to Ryan, and Russell pinned a new badge on his chest. Then, Russell handed something to Beverly and asked her to follow his lead. She watched as Russell pinned 3 stars on the collar of Ryan's shirt, the rank insignia worn by a sheriff. She attached the remaining set of stars to his other collar and stood back to admire him. "Congratulations, Sheriff," the commissioner said, shaking Ryan's hand. "And may God have mercy on you," he added, causing everyone in the room to laugh. "Thank you, Commissioner," Ryan replied. "There's tea and Coca-Cola in the fridge," Russell said, grinning. "And Sheriff Caldwell, sorry, but you get the honor of handing out the cake." He laughed. "Sorry, no beer, we're still on duty, you know." Ryan cut the large cake and served Beverly first, then the deputies. He gave a piece to Russell and then served the commissioners. He cut himself a small piece and noticed that about a third of the cake was still left. "Why don't we leave it for the guys on patrol?" he asked. Russell agreed. "Good idea," he said. The female deputy smiled and put the cake in the refrigerator for later. Ryan finished his slice and then walked around the room, introducing himself to the deputies who would soon be under his command. They all seemed like nice people, he thought, and appeared to accept him as the new sheriff. After the ceremony, Beverly approached Ryan and looked him over carefully. He looked so good in uniform, she thought, almost as if it was made especially for him. "You look amazing, honey," she said. "I'm so proud of you." He smiled and kissed her. "Thank you, honey," he replied, using a terrible John Wayne impersonation that made her laugh. "It's time for me to go back, darling," she said. "I need to stop by the store to get chicken feed and start dinner. I'll see you at home." "I'll be there," he replied, giving her another kiss. He watched her leave, noticing how all the deputies congratulated her and welcomed her into their little community. Ryan turned to Russell. "So, what now?" he asked. "Now I'll issue your weapons and equipment," Russell said. They headed to the armory, where Russell asked Ryan to sign for a duty belt and a Smith & Wesson M&P9, a polymer frame, striker-fired, full-size pistol, similar to the Glock 17. Ryan knew it was one of the best 9mm pistols on the market and was surprised that a small sheriff's department like this one issued such high-quality gear. He had half expected them to be using old 6-shooter revolvers. "One more thing," Russell said, taking a small box from his desk drawer. He handed it to Ryan, who opened it to reveal a small badge with a blue field, white stars, and 3 stripes, one white with red stripes on the top and bottom. The white stripe read U.S. Army Veteran. "What's this?" Ryan asked. "It's a small token of appreciation for your service," Russell said. "All veterans get one here." Ryan noticed that some of the deputies had similar badges, and Russell's badge said U.S. Marine Corps Veteran. "Thank you," Ryan said. "You're welcome," Russell replied. "So, what's next?" Ryan asked. "We'll start getting you up to speed tomorrow morning," Russell said. "Be here at 8 a.m. sharp. Don't be late." "See you then," Ryan said, picking up his civilian clothes. The deputy said goodbye to him as he walked out the door. When he got home, he kissed Beverly and headed upstairs. He looked at himself in the mirror. "There's a new sheriff in town," he said quietly to his reflection. "The guys will never believe this," he thought, smiling as he imagined himself saying, "Feeling lucky, buddy?" That evening, they shared a quiet dinner and spent time making love. "I'm glad I got to be part of the ceremony today," Beverly said. "Me too," Ryan replied. "Promise me you'll be careful out there," she asked. He hugged her, feeling her warmth, and kissed her. I'll be careful, honey. I promise. The next 2 weeks flew by for Ryan as Russell gave him a crash course in law enforcement. Ryan watched as Russell instructed the deputies on their daily tasks, absorbing every detail. This was a good team, he thought, dedicated, motivated, and loyal. They knew their stuff. Russell ended the briefing by turning to Ryan. Is there anything you'd like to add, Sheriff? Russell asked. Ryan knew this was Russell's way of showing the deputies that Ryan would eventually lead the department. Be careful out there, Ryan said, and the deputies nodded in approval. Russell took Ryan to the shooting range and was impressed when Ryan passed the test with ease, hitting all the bad guys while avoiding the good guys. Even though they were just cardboard cutouts, it was a useful exercise to simulate real-life situations. They then moved on to the defensive driving course, which Ryan completed without any problems. When he finished, Russell, sitting in the passenger seat, shook his head. Where did you learn to drive like that? He asked. Oh, you'd be surprised, Ryan replied with a grin. No, I wouldn't, Russell said, smiling. During his training with Russell, Ryan was like a sponge, soaking up everything he could from the experienced sheriff. Russell showed him how to use the radio and computer in the patrol car and walked him through basic traffic stops. Ryan also enrolled in an online program through the University of Texas and spent his free time completing assignments. Meanwhile, Russell drove Ryan around town, introducing him to the locals, who quickly warmed up to him once they got over the shock of his eye patch and scar. One day, while they were in town, Ryan turned to Russell. You seem to know a lot about me, Ryan said. Could you explain how that happened? No problem, Russell replied. I knew about you almost from the moment you arrived in town. Goldsmith contacted me after you made a large deposit in his bank and asked me to check on you, so I did. I reached out to my FBI contacts and have been keeping an eye on you for some time. I saw you sitting on your porch, and I asked myself, why does a man with so much money choose to live in a crumbling house and look like a rejected character from an old Clint Eastwood movie? I figured you were either hiding from someone or a powder keg ready to explode. I just wanted some peace and quiet, Ryan said. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. With that much money in the bank? Russell asked. Where did you get all that money, by the way? I made most of it from work, Ryan replied. The rest came from successful investments, and a considerable part was given to me by an oil sheik who appreciated what I did for him. He gave me a second chance and told me to find a place where I could have peace, which is how I ended up here. I thought no one would find me. What about the money you gave Beverly? Russell asked. Did you expect something in return? No, nothing, Ryan replied. I just felt sorry for her. As I told Goldsmith, I know what it's like to lose everything that matters. When I saw her on the road that day, it reminded me of what I'd been through, and that I almost didn't make it. I understand, Russell said quietly. It hurts terribly to be abandoned like your wife did to you. Oh yes, I saw the reports. I went through something similar myself, a long time ago. Do you realize, though, that you can't help everyone the way you helped her? I know, Ryan replied. Ryan also spent time patrolling with other deputies, partly to learn the job and partly to get to know them better. He enjoyed spending time with them, and they seemed to appreciate his efforts. He even went on night patrol with Russell a couple of times. One night, they found themselves on a back road known as the local Lover's Lane. They pulled up to an old pickup truck rocking from side to side. Both men knew what was going on, so Russell parked behind the truck and briefly flashed his headlights, causing the couple inside to look out the back window in surprise. Russell turned to Ryan. Want to handle this one? Why not? Ryan replied. He got out of the car, holding a flashlight in one hand and keeping his other hand close to his gun. He tapped on the window with the flashlight. A nervous young man rolled the window down. Ryan saw that the guy was shirtless, and his pants were hurriedly pulled up but not buttoned. He glanced at the girl in the passenger seat, who was covering herself with a blanket. It was obvious she was completely without anything underneath, with a pile of clothes on the floor at her feet. The cabin smelled of sweat and night. The couple looked shocked at Ryan's appearance. Driver's license and registration, please, Ryan said. The young man pulled out his license and retrieved the registration from the glove compartment. Ryan then turned to the girl. "I'd like to see your ID, young lady." She fumbled in her purse, which was on the floor, and handed him her license. Ryan examined both IDs, confirming they were both 18, probably high school students just hanging out. He returned their documents and turned to the young man. "Sir," he said, "get dressed." He nodded toward the girl. "You too." The young man got out of the truck, buttoning his pants and tightening his belt. Ryan motioned for him to stand at the back of the truck, then looked him over carefully. The boy looked close to peeing his pants. "Do you love this girl, son?" Ryan asked quietly. "Why, yes, sir, I do," the boy stammered. Ryan nodded. "Are you planning to marry her?" "I don't know," the young man replied nervously. "Maybe." "So, you like her enough to have an intimate with her out here in the middle of nowhere, but not enough to marry her? Do your parents know?" "Do her parents know?" "No, sir, they don't," the boy said, trembling. "Listen, son," Ryan said. "It's late, and I really don't want to drag you in for public indecency. So, I'll say this once, next time, show some respect. Take her to a motel or somewhere with 4 walls and clean sheets. It's just dangerous out here late at night, people crossing the border, wild animals, snakes, one-eyed sheriffs. You get what I'm saying?" Ryan asked. The young man nodded quickly. "Okay," Ryan said. "Get out of here, and don't let me catch you on this road again. Got it?" "Yes, sir," the man replied, scrambling back into the truck. He glanced out the window. "Thank you, Sheriff," he added. Ryan nodded, and the young man drove off, clearly relieved that he wasn't going to jail, at least not that night. Ryan got back into the car and looked over at Russell, who was sporting a big grin. "Everything good?" Russell asked. "Yeah, they were doing some dirty stuff," Ryan said. The girl was completely without clothes under the blanket. "And you let them go?" Russell asked. "What the hell?" Ryan shrugged. There was nothing criminal going on, just a couple of kids trying to have some fun. "I gave him a good scare, told him to stay off this road, and advised him to take her to a motel or something." Russell laughed. "Welcome to law enforcement, Ryan," he said, starting the car again. Ryan smiled, knowing he'd have a funny story to tell Beverly that night. During this period, Ryan and Beverly were also busy planning their wedding. They eventually decided to hold the ceremony in his backyard. While Ryan worked, Beverly organized most of the details. Ryan offered to help, but Beverly wouldn't hear of it. She spoke with the pastor of the country church she had attended when her first husband was alive, and he agreed to officiate the wedding, but only after he met Ryan. The meeting went well. Ryan showed up at the church in his uniform, and they had a friendly conversation. By the time the meeting ended, the pastor felt at ease with the idea of Beverly marrying the tall, scarred man. Ryan followed the news, but other events seemed to have pushed the Knight Petroleum case off the front pages. Everything, including Jake's will and the class action lawsuit, was now in the hands of the courts and lawyers, who seemed more adept at slowing down the process than resolving it. Ryan wondered if the problem would ever be resolved. He kept in touch with Sarah, Bob, Bill, and Jorge. They were all happy for him and thrilled to hear that he was now the sheriff. They loved the photos Beverly sent of Ryan in uniform. "The boys will never believe this," Bob wrote in response to the pictures, making Ryan laugh. One day, while Ryan and Russell were working in the office, Agent Smith walked through the door. He smiled when he saw Ryan in his uniform. "Damn," Smith said. "You look good in that uniform, it suits you." "Thank you," Ryan said. "Yeah, I'm going to make a real lawman out of him," Russell added, shaking Smith's hand. "So, what can we do for you, Agent Smith?" "Do you have a couple of minutes?" Smith asked. "Of course," Ryan replied. "Is there a place where we can talk?" Smith asked. Ryan glanced at Russell before answering. "Right here's fine. Sheriff Coltrane knows everything, there are no secrets in this office." Smith looked at Russell, who nodded in agreement. "Okay," Smith said, sitting down. There were a few things that bothered me about that camp in New Mexico. First, there were only 2 cars from Mexico and a Learjet. I knew, with the number of bodies we found, they couldn't all have arrived on that plane or in those 2 cars. I also doubted anyone could have heard the gunfire from 12 miles away, so I reviewed the 911 call and had our analysts check it. They detected the sound of a running engine in the background. So someone made the call while they were on the move? Ryan asked. Smith nodded. Yes, exactly. I dug deeper and found a vehicle registered to Knight Petroleum in New Mexico. The address matched the camp's location. We launched a federal manhunt, and we found the vehicle in long-term parking at Albuquerque Sunport Airport. Sunport? Ryan asked. Yeah, that's the local international airport. It's been called that since the 1990s, thanks to the 280 days of sunshine a year. Smith took out a photo and handed it to Ryan. Surveillance cameras caught this person getting out of the vehicle. Ryan studied the photo, and Smith saw the recognition on his face. Have you seen this man before? Smith asked. 100 times, Ryan said grimly. In my nightmares. He's the one who fired the RPG that did this, he added, pointing to his eye. Do you know who he is? His name is James Weston, Smith said. He used to work for the FBI but left about 5 years ago to work for Knight Petroleum. He's one of Jacob Knight's top enforcers. Do you know where he is now? Ryan asked. We've put him on the wanted list, but so far, no trace of him. I'm sure he knows we're looking for him, and he knows how to stay hidden. Do you think he was involved in the murder of your agents? Ryan asked. I don't know, Smith said, but it wouldn't surprise me. Do you think he'll come here? Ryan asked. I'd almost guarantee it, Smith said. You're the one who gave us all the key information, so I'm sure he's coming for you. He handed Ryan several more photos of Weston from his FBI days. You should warn your deputies. Ryan nodded, and Russell agreed. Are you staying a while? Ryan asked. I think I'll stay for a day or 2, Smith said. Why don't you stay with me? Ryan suggested. Beverly would love the company, and we always have plenty of food. I'd love to, Smith replied. Thank you. It's settled then, Ryan said. Let me call her and let her know. I'll pick you up in the morning, Russell said. The sheriff gets his new car tomorrow. Sounds like a plan, Smith agreed. At the end of the day, Smith followed Ryan to his house. Beverly greeted Ryan with a kiss, then extended her hand to Smith. It's good to see you again, Agent Smith, she said. I hope you enjoy meatloaf, mashed potatoes with gravy, and green beans. Sounds great, Smith said. They sat down to dinner after Ryan changed out of his uniform. I have to say, Ryan, Smith remarked, that uniform really suits you. I'm impressed. Thank you, Ryan replied. I still have a lot to learn. Smith laughed. You're always learning in this business. Any news about Knight Petroleum? Ryan asked. I haven't heard anything in the news for a while. That's because everything is now in the hands of lawyers and bureaucrats, Smith said. The DA is investigating possible links to pill trafficking. Lisa and her lawyers are working with prosecutors in the East. She seems to be getting too close to Jake and Elmer's operations. Is that why they tried to kill her? Ryan asked. Looks like it, Smith nodded. I'm sure she knew at least part of what was going on. She's been with Jake for years. But she says he was pretty good at keeping her in the dark. Do you think she'll be prosecuted? Ryan asked. Smith shook his head. I doubt it. She testified against them, and personally, I don't think anyone would go after a woman in her position. What about the murder of those 2 agents? Ryan asked. After the incident in New Mexico, the agency changed its approach, Smith said. But honestly, I don't think it'll lead to much. A few heads did roll after that, though. Smith paused, looking at Ryan. I have to say, I went over that camp in New Mexico with a fine-tooth comb, like I do with any crime scene, Smith continued. I don't understand how you managed to get in and out without leaving any trace. No fingerprints, no DNA, nothing, just shell casings and carnage. I've had experience with that kind of thing, Ryan said quietly. Yeah, Smith said softly. But you know you can't do that anymore, not while you wear that badge. I know, Ryan replied. I don't think it'll be necessary again. I hope so, Smith said. Me too, Ryan agreed. The next day, Russell picked Ryan up in his patrol car. Ryan kissed Beverly and reminded her to be careful. Call me right away if you notice anything suspicious, he said. Don't worry, I will, she reassured him. Now go catch the bad guys. Ryan got into the car and Russell drove off, with Smith following behind. When they arrived at the station, Russell parked in the back and Smith parked nearby. Ryan saw the new SUV with four-wheel drive and turned to Russell. Is this mine? He asked. Russell nodded. Exactly. I know how much you love trucks, and I know you'll appreciate the extra headroom. Thank you, Ryan said, admiring the vehicle. They got out of the car, and a man in a shirt and tie approached them. He handed Ryan the keys. I hope you like your new car, Sheriff, the man said. Best in class, with all the bells and whistles. It'll outrun almost anything, on or off the road. Thank you, Ryan said. Looks great. Great job, Wilbur, Russell added. Do you have the paperwork? Of course, Sheriff, Wilbur said. Good, take it inside, Sergeant Bleedo will handle it, Russell said. Wilbur nodded and went inside. Damn, Smith said, looking over the truck. New job, new truck, new woman, you've really hit the jackpot. Ryan smiled. I won't argue with that. They walked inside and headed to the briefing room, where the other deputies had already gathered. Russell, Ryan, and Smith took their places at the front. Russell held the briefing, then introduced Smith, who pointed to a large photo of James Weston on the wall. The man in this photo is James Weston, Smith began. He's wanted by the FBI for questioning in connection with crimes related to the night petroleum camp in New Mexico, where the attack took place. He's a former FBI agent, and we believe he's headed here. Excuse me, Agent Smith, one of the deputies said, raising his hand. Why would he be coming here? Smith looked at Ryan, and everyone else did the same. He'll be looking for me, Ryan said. Whatever you do, don't try to deal with this alone. If you see him, please notify me immediately and call for reinforcements. This individual should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. Everyone nodded and studied the photographs handed out by Sergeant Bleedo. Any questions? Ryan asked. There were no questions, so Ryan dismissed everyone with a warning, be careful out there. Everyone left the briefing room and headed toward their assignments. Some, like Sergeant Bleedo, went to their desks, others headed to their patrol cars. Ryan walked forward to where his car was parked. A couple of minutes later, Sergeant Bleedo returned to Russell's office, where he, Ryan, and Smith were discussing the situation with Weston. Sheriff, she said, there's a man up ahead. I think it's that guy Weston. He has a hostage and a gun. The three men jumped up and ran to the front office. Ryan looked out the window and saw Weston across the street. One arm was wrapped around the neck of the little blonde Beverly, and in his other hand, he had a small revolver. Well, Weston, he shouted. I know you're there. Come out here and fight me like a man. Ryan looked at Russell. That's my problem, Sheriff, he said. Let me handle her. Besides, it's time to start taking on more responsibility. Russell thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay, Ryan, he said quietly. How do you want to play this out? Ryan looked at the remaining deputies in the office. Clear the streets, he ordered. Get these civilians out of the way and block both ends of this street. They quickly walked up the door and began to lead the civilians to safety. Sergeant Bleedo spoke on the radio, and 4 sheriff's patrol cars blocked both ends of the street. Ryan looked at the 2 men next to him. Okay, Russell, I want you to stand 10 yards to my right, he said. Smith, you go 10 yards to my left. Follow my example. Right, Russell said. He glanced at Ryan, realizing that the tall, wounded man was not only in charge but also in command, and Russell knew there was a big difference between the two. They walked out the door, and Russell moved 10 yards down the sidewalk as ordered, drawing his weapon. Smith walked in the opposite direction, also drawing his weapon. Ryan stood still and looked Weston in the face. He glanced at Beverly, who was struggling as Weston held her tightly. He could see that she was scared. He looked at her face, and as she calmed down, he nodded slightly. He pulled out his pistol and chambered a bullet. Standing in the open, he took aim at Weston. "Boy, if you don't put that gun down and let this woman go right now, you're going to be in big trouble," he said. "Can you hear me? I'll give you up to 3. The nearby deputies looked at Ryan in surprise. Some had never seen anyone do this. Ryan didn't even try to hide. Even worse, he provoked the man using language that would anger anyone in these parts. Ryan stood still, his weapon aimed at Weston, who looked nervously between Smith, Ryan, and Russell. "This is between us, Caldwell," Weston said. "I missed last time, but I won't miss this time. Maybe first, I'll take this beautiful woman of yours." 1, Ryan counted. Weston shook his head. Ryan looked at Beverly and nodded slightly, hoping she would get the message. He had taught her self-defense and recently showed her how to throw a man who grabbed her from behind. 2, Ryan counted. He looked at Weston's feet again. "What is it, Weston? Are you hiding behind a woman?" he teased. Weston's face began to turn red. Ryan then saw Beverly's hand move to the arm around her neck. "Good girl," he thought to himself. 3, Ryan counted. Beverly leaned as far as she could, knocking Weston off balance. Unable to throw him, she spun around, kneeing him in the groin before running into the deputy's arms. Weston, enraged, confused, and in pain, rose to his feet and aimed at Ryan. Ryan wasted no time and shot straight at Weston. Russell and Smith fired 2 shots simultaneously into Weston's body. The 3 men approached Weston's body, still holding him at gunpoint. As they approached, Ryan kicked Weston's gun away, noticing that it was an old single-action revolver. The hammer had not yet been cocked. He looked at Russell before speaking. "Do I need to read him his rights right now?" he asked, making Russell laugh. "I don't think it'll be a problem," Russell said. He looked at Weston's face before speaking again. "Did you aim for his left eye?" he asked. "Of course," Ryan said. "An eye for an eye, isn't that what a good book says?" "Yes, but I don't think it was talking about your shooting prowess," Russell said. Ryan turned to see Sergeant Bleedo crossing the street. "I called an ambulance, Sheriff," she said. Ryan nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said, motioning for her to follow him. He went to Beverly, who threw herself into his arms, sobbing. He held her while she cried. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I was so scared," she said. "Everything is fine," he reassured her. "You did great. You and I are partners, remember?" She nodded. "Why don't you go inside with Sergeant Bleedo? She'll take care of you and record your statements." "Okay, I'll be there soon," Beverly said, trembling. Sergeant Bleedo put her arm around Beverly's shoulders and led her back across the street. "It's okay, honey," he heard Bleedo say. "He can't hurt you anymore." Ryan returned to Weston's body. "I thought you said this guy was a former FBI agent." Ryan asked Smith. "Yes, he was," Smith said. "He must have gone crazy in his old age or something." "I guess so," Ryan said. By then, the ambulance had arrived. The paramedic examined Weston and shook his head. They placed his body on a stretcher, covered him, and loaded him into the vehicle. "Well, Sheriff," Russell said, "looks like you'll have to call in a cleanup crew, and you'll have to do paperwork. You know there will be an investigation into the shooting, right?" Ryan nodded. "That's what I thought." "Welcome to law enforcement," Russell said, patting Ryan on the back. "But one thing is for sure." "What exactly?" Ryan asked. "Now everyone in the city will feel much safer. Anyone who comes here with the intention of causing a mess will think twice before confronting the sheriff in this town." They returned to the office, and Ryan made several calls while Sergeant Bleedo took Beverly's statement. When they finished, the sergeant brought Beverly to Ryan. "Sheriff, I'm going to take Beverly to her car if that's okay," she asked. Beverly was delivering eggs to Mrs. Williams when the suspect grabbed her. He knew that Mrs. Williams lived nearby on a small street a few blocks from the city center, within walking distance. He looked at Beverly before answering. "Are you okay?" he asked her. "Now, yes," she said. He hugged her, holding her tightly. "Okay, honey," he said. "Go home. I'll see you in the evening." "I need to deliver more eggs first," she said. He smiled and nodded. "Okay, honey. Be careful. If you feel uncomfortable, call me, and I will come to the rescue." "Everything will be fine," she said. He watched as Sergeant Bleedo escorted Beverly to the exit. "I guess that wraps up that part of my case," Smith said. "I'll go back if you don't need anything else." "I think we got it done," Ryan said. "Thank you again for everything. You'll come to the wedding, won't you?" "Wild horses won't hold me back," Smith said. He shook Russell's hand. "It was good to see you again, Sheriff," he said. Russell nodded. "And don't get sick, Agent Smith." After Smith left, Russell turned to Ryan. "Well, catching the bad guy is only half the job. Let's go. We have a lot of paperwork, or rather, you have," he said, resigning himself to the inevitable. Ryan walked with Russell to the office. That night, he held a trembling Beverly in his arms, feeling her soft, smooth skin next to him. "There will be enough time for love later. Hold me, please," she begged. He held her tighter and inhaled her scent. "This is the second time you saved my life," she said. "Tell me, will every day be like this?" "No, honey," he said. "I think we're done with this. They threw everything they had at us, but they failed." However, he knew deep down that they were just lucky. If Weston had cocked the gun, things might have turned out differently. He didn't talk about it so as not to add additional worry to Beverly. 2 weeks after the shooting, Ryan sat at the large desk in his office. Russell had already moved to a smaller table, giving him access to what would become his permanent workspace. After finishing his reports for the day, he worked on his online course, trying to get enough progress to spare a week for his honeymoon. Russell went on patrol and to meet with a real estate agent in hopes of selling his house. There was a knock on the door. He looked up and saw Sergeant Bleedo. "Sheriff, a Texas Ranger wants to see you," she said. "Let him in," Ryan said. She stepped back to allow the ranger to enter the office. Ryan looked at the tall, thin, square-faced man who looked like he had just stepped out of an old western. He was wearing a beat-up Stetson hat, a red shirt, jeans, cowboy boots with spurs, and a long raincoat. Ryan noticed the badge and pistols on his hip. It seemed to him that they were capsule revolvers, but he wasn't sure. He motioned for the ranger to enter the office and accepted his hand. "Have a seat. How can I help you today?" Ranger Ryan asked. "My name is Peace," the ranger said, sitting down. "Justice O. Peace. Just wanted to let you know that the investigation is complete, and the decision has been made in your favor." "That's good to hear, Ranger Peace," Ryan said, wondering what kind of name it was. The ranger looked at him carefully before continuing. "It was a pretty good shot," Justice said. "Did you really aim for his left eye?" Ryan nodded. "Yes." "How did you know this?" "You told Sheriff Coltrane that, didn't you?" asked Justice. "I don't remember it being in the report," Ryan said. "It wasn't," Justice said. "This was my personal observation. This is my job. Tell me, is it because—" He pointed to the bandage covering Ryan's left eye. "I guess so," Ryan said. Justice nodded. "An eye for an eye, right?" he asked. "He gouged out your eye in the Middle East, and you reciprocated his feelings. I can understand that, your idea of biblical justice, right?" "How do you know this?" Ryan asked. Justice shrugged. "My job is to know," he said. "I can understand a lot about a person by looking into his eyes, or in your case, in the eye." Justice stood up and looked out the window. "It's been a long time since I've been in these parts. A lot has changed over the years. Ryan wondered what he was talking about. Of course, many changes had happened over the years, and new buildings had been constructed, but he had seen photographs of the city and knew that it was almost the same as it was 40 years ago, just a quiet, peaceful town. Ryan said, "And I'm paid to keep it that way." Justice turned and looked at him. "Yes, exactly," Justice said. "You know, when Sheriff Coltrane first named you for this position, many of us, including myself, thought it was a mistake. It doesn't happen often, but I'm human enough to admit when I'm wrong." He extended his hand. Ryan stood up and shook it. "Thank you, Ranger." "That means a lot to me, especially coming from you," Ryan said. Justice smiled and nodded. "Well, it's not every day that I meet someone who can make another's heart stop with just one look," Justice said. Ryan was shocked. He was sure that no one knew what happened that day in the courthouse with Jake. "You know, you remind me of an old friend. They said about him that he would storm the gates of hell with a bucket of water," Justice said. "I just wanted to look you in the face and make sure that you are that kind of person, and I believe that you are." "Well, I'm flattered, Ranger," Ryan said. "Listen, if you or your unit needs anything from us, please do not hesitate to contact us." Justice smiled at Ryan with a sad expression as they shook hands. "I'll remember this, Sheriff Caldwell," Justice said. "Take care of your woman, do you hear?" "Absolutely, Ranger," Ryan said. Justice nodded. "See you," he said, heading toward the door. "Have a nice day." "Okay, we'll try, Ranger," Ryan said. A chill ran down Ryan's spine as he watched the Ranger walk through the office, tipping his hat in salute to Sergeant Bleedo. He sat back down at the computer and looked out the window, hearing a clop-clop sound like hooves hitting the pavement. But when he looked outside, he saw nothing. "Maybe I was imagining all this," he thought, and returned to work. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. He looked and saw Sergeant Bleedo. "Yes, Sergeant, how can I help you?" he asked. "If you don't mind, Sheriff, may I ask what that Ranger wanted?" she asked. "He said the investigation was complete and the shooting was determined to be justified," Ryan said. "I don't know why they sent a Ranger to tell us this. Don't they use email?" "Who knows these days?" she asked with a smile. "Can I speak frankly, Sheriff?" "Always," Sergeant Ryan said. "What's on your mind?" "Well, the other deputies and I discussed this," she began. "We were a little concerned at first when Sheriff Coltrane appointed you to this position. I mean, with your lack of law enforcement experience and all." "I understand that," Ryan said. "It bothered me too." "Well, I think I can speak for everyone here when I say that we are all glad to have you with us," she said with a smile. "Thank you, Elaine," he said, addressing her by name. "It means a lot to me. Honestly, I'm glad to be here with you all too." She smiled, hearing this. "That's it, Sheriff," she said. "It's time for me to get back to work." Ryan nodded. "Yeah, me too," he said. 2 weeks later, he and Beverly received notice from the county. The council nominated them for an award, and the governor, along with the state attorney general, were going to present the awards personally. Ryan didn't think he deserved the award. In his mind, he was simply doing his job. However, he was glad that they decided to reward Beverly. He put on his best uniform and escorted Beverly to the courthouse where the ceremony was to take place. Listening to the governor's speech, he thought it was somehow symbolic, the one-eyed sheriff receiving an award from the governor who was confined to a wheelchair. He watched with pride as the attorney general placed the award around slender Beverly's neck. Then it was his turn. After the governor presented him with a letter of recognition, he turned to the audience for a short speech, ending with the words, "And let this be a fair warning to those who come here with the intention of disturbing the peace. Don't mess with Texas." Everyone cheered loudly, including Ryan and Beverly. After all the congratulations were over, Beverly whispered in his ear, "I love you," she said. "I too, Beverly," he replied. 2 weeks later, Ryan was in his upstairs bedroom putting on a tuxedo. Today was the day he and Beverly had been waiting for, the day they would become husband and wife. Beverly, being the strong woman she is, handled the incident with Weston well despite the initial shock. While getting dressed, he looked out the window and saw a snow-white helicopter land on his shooting range. He saw a familiar logo on its side and wondered what was going on. It was a logo he hadn't seen in about 4 years. He knew Jim planned to take them to Las Vegas for their honeymoon, but he didn't expect it. He was shocked to see Jim exit the helicopter in a fresh uniform. What the hell, he thought. He ran downstairs and made it to the kitchen just as Jim walked inside. "Jim," he said. "What the hell?" Jim smiled and shook his hand. Like I said, showing off his uniform with golden wings and golden stripes on his sleeve. "Looks great," Ryan said. "But here comes my boss," Jim said. "Boss?" Ryan asked. Jim pointed to the window. Ryan looked and saw a large white limousine pull up to the house. Ryan ran outside. As soon as the door opened, 2 relatively young men from the Middle East stepped out. One of them held the door for a very familiar man in a snow-white robe, and in his hand was the hand of a very attractive woman from the Middle East. Ryan left the house and met them at the gate. "Sheikh Abdullah," Ryan said. "As-salamu alaikum," he added, shaking the man's outstretched hand. He smiled and replied, "Wa alaikum as-salam." "Ryan, it's good to see you again, my old friend." "I'm surprised," Ryan said. "I wasn't expecting you." The old man smiled and nodded. "I just finished some work and decided to visit you," he said. "This is, as you say, the icing on the cake. Please allow me to introduce you to my wife, Aliyah," he said, turning slightly toward the small woman next to him. Ryan knew that the sheikh was not as traditionalist as other Middle Eastern men, but he did not want to offend him or his wife. So he placed his right hand on the left side of his chest and bowed slightly to greet her. She smiled and did the same. "And my eldest sons, Muhammad and Ibrahim," said the sheikh. Ryan shook their hands and greeted them as well. "I heard you spent some time in our country," Muhammad said. "Yeah, I worked for your dad for a while, but I never met his family," Ryan said. "My sons were in college at the time," the sheikh said. "Harvard Business School. Now they have to prove that I didn't waste my money on their education." Ryan smiled at this. "Please come inside," he said. He opened the gate for them and led them into the house. The house was already full of guests, but Ryan found Bob and beckoned him over. "Sheikh, this is my brother-in-law, Robert Green," Ryan said. Bob shook hands with the sheikh, then with Muhammad and Ibrahim. He nodded to Aliyah, noticing that Ryan didn't shake her hand. "So you're Gunner, huh?" asked the sheikh. Bob smiled with slight uncertainty and nodded. "Yes, that's what they call me," he said. "This suits you," said the sheikh. "Jim told me all about you. I followed your career at the Department of Commerce. Your report on how to make Amtrak profitable was quite interesting. Have you read it?" Bob asked, surprised. "Oh yes," said the sheikh. "It's a shame your government will never accept it. There's too much common sense in it." Everyone laughed. "Personally, I think your talent is wasted at the Department of Commerce. Perhaps it's time to spread your wings and take on new challenges." "I don't know what else I could do," Bob said. "Perhaps you would like to work for me," said the sheikh. "Work for you?" asked Bob. "Doing what?" "Well, it will be on the news soon, so I can tell you," the sheikh said. "As you know, Knight Petroleum is in a state of crisis. Stocks are falling, confidence is collapsing, and the entire infrastructure is falling apart." "Yeah, I've been keeping an eye on it," Bob said. "Well, I just completed the deal to acquire it," said the sheikh. Bob looked stunned. "Yes? We now control almost 75% of the company's available shares, and we have concluded a deal. All that remains is the approval of your government, but this is just a formality at this stage. We are currently in the process of recruiting new management who will take over once the transition is complete. The entire old management team is leaving, and new management will be in place within a few days. I just needed a new CFO and decided it was time to bring in some new blood. Would you like to take this position?" "Wow," Bob said, excited. "Yes, sir, I would like to." "Very excellent," said the sheikh. "Let's meet after the celebration, and we'll discuss the details of the acquisition and your compensation package." "That sounds great, sheikh." "Thank you," Bob said. The sheikh turned to Ryan and took an envelope from Mohammed. He handed it to Ryan. "I hope you don't mind," said the sheikh, "a little wedding gift. I lent you my helicopter and my pilot for a week, and I took the liberty of upgrading your number. Now you and your beautiful bride will live in the penthouse at my insistence, and I also provided you with some pocket money." "Thank you, sheikh." "I shouldn't have," Ryan started to say. "I know, but I wanted to," said the older man. "Enjoy yourself. After all, how often do you go to Las Vegas?" "Very true," Ryan said. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart." "By the way, where's your beautiful bride?" asked the sheikh. "She's upstairs with my daughter getting ready," Ryan said. "Tradition requires the bride to remain out of sight until the wedding begins." "Ah, I understand," said the sheikh. "Well then, Mr. Green, could you show us to our seats?" "Of course," said Bob. "Then I have to go back. I'm my father's best friend." The sheikh nodded approvingly. Ryan watched them leave and opened the envelope. His eyes widened when he saw the prepaid Visa card. The attached card said it was loaded with $100,000, a small gift indeed. Although he knew that for the sheikh, this was a trifle, he looked back at the house and thought about everything he had to go through to get to this point in his life. The house was full of friends, both old and new. His old team, Bill, Buster, Ian, Jim, and Cap, were all there, along with Jorge, Jay Goldsmith, all the off-duty deputies, and of course, Russell. Several members of the county council were also there. He hoped they had enough food and drink for everyone. He was glad that he had enough space in his yard for all the cars. Many of Beverly's friends were also there, as well as some of their neighbors, but there was one person who was missing. He looked ahead and saw a dark SUV pull up into the driveway. When the car stopped, he saw Agent Smith get out and then open the passenger door for his wife. Ryan smiled as he greeted his friend. "I thought you weren't coming," Ryan said. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," Smith said. He introduced his wife, Gloria, and Buster escorted them to their seats. Ryan looked at his watch and realized it was time. He checked himself one last time in the mirror, then headed towards the altar. He stood at the altar on the street with Bob, Ian, and Cap. Everyone turned around as the wedding march started playing on the outdoor sound system. Everyone smiled as little Ryan walked down the aisle, scattering flower petals before the procession. Bob supported Ryan as he watched his future wife walk down the aisle, arm in arm with Russell, preceded by Sarah, Elaine Bleedo, and Trish Calloway, Beverly's longtime friend. Beverly seemed so beautiful to him that he had to remind himself to breathe as they approached the altar. The pastor asked, "Who gives this woman to be his wife?" "On behalf of the community of Hard Rock, Texas, I do," Russell said. Everyone smiled at this. The ceremony was inspiring, and everything was recorded and broadcast live for Beverly's son, who was unable to make it from the Naval Academy. A few days before the wedding, Ryan finally took the time to talk to him on Skype, and they got along great. When the ceremony was over, the pastor asked them to turn to the audience. "And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you for the first time Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Caldwell," the pastor said, drawing applause from everyone. The reception was great, with a local band playing an eclectic mix of country, bluegrass, and rock music. There was plenty of food and drink, and everyone had a good time reminiscing and dancing. Everyone came over to wish the newlyweds well, and Ryan was glad that no one ruined the day by mentioning Lisa, not that it was necessary. Ryan already knew about her situation thanks to Jorge, Sarah, and the others. Having lost almost all of her fortune, she was forced to sell the mansion and was now living in a nursing home undergoing therapy that could last for years. On top of this, she was still considered complicit in many of the actions of Jake, Elmer, and the board. The only thing that saved her from prison was her cooperation and her physical condition. Timmy, the man who shot Lisa, received about 10 years in prison thanks to a deal his lawyers struck with federal prosecutors. Some middle and lower-level managers at night also went to prison for various crimes. Police in England have still not solved Blackstone's murder but have been pursuing all leads with the help of the FBI. The class action was still slowly making its way through the system, and Ryan didn't expect to ever see a penny from it. However, he was relieved to realize that Knight's legacy would forever be remembered in infamy. Authorities attributed the attack on the night complex to a pill cartel operating south of the border, and Smith was en route to Washington, D.C., where he would take a new position as deputy director in charge of cleaning up the agency. All in all, Ryan thought everything had worked out well. He and Beverly hadn't worked out all the details about the two houses yet, but he knew they would eventually. Beverly's egg business was booming, and she mentioned expanding it and perhaps hiring a couple of people by turning her old house into office space. "I just want to thank you for staying to look after my chickens," Beverly said to Sarah and Bob. "I hope it's not too much to ask." "Nonsense, Mom," Sarah said. "I'm a veterinarian, remember? It's a pleasure. Besides, you two deserve some time together. Are you sure you can handle this?" Ryan asked, handing Bob the keys to the house. "Don't worry, Dad," Bob said. "Sarah and I will take care of everything. We'll help them, won't we, guys?" Buster, Cap, Ian, Bill, and Jorge nodded. "Okay," Ryan said. "Thank you for everything." "No problem, Dad," Bob said. "You guys go have fun." Ryan turned to Russell. "Can you handle everything?" he asked. Russell laughed. "Oh, I think we can make it through a week without you," he said, chuckling. "Go already, your helicopter's waiting." Ryan and Beverly said goodbye and walked through the hallway of guests throwing rice. They climbed into the helicopter, and Jim closed the door behind them. Jim had already loaded their luggage into the helicopter, and they were ready to depart. Everyone could see the "Just Married" sign on one of the back windows. After the door was closed, "Sorry," Cap whispered to Sheikh Abdullah, "I couldn't resist." "It's okay," said the Sheikh. "This will give Jim something to do." Everyone laughed. They waved as Ryan and Beverly waved to them from the helicopter. They watched the helicopter take off slowly, then turn around and head north. "You think they'll join the Mile High Club in this thing?" asked Buster. "This is not the first time this has happened," the Sheikh said, smiling. "It's a lot more comfortable than that old thing Jim likes to fix." "Do you think Ryan finally found what he was looking for?" Ian asked. The Sheikh nodded. "I think so," he said. Sarah looked at him in bewilderment. "What was he looking for?" she asked. The Sheikh looked at the helicopter, which was almost out of sight. "Peace," he said. "What do you think of our fourth installment of the story today? From my impressions of the past 3 installments, I like this one the best. What's your impression? Let me know in the comments. See you in the comments.